Okay, let's get right into it. We're talking about a diplomatic game so high stakes that the line between making peace and waging war has gotten, well, dangerously blurry. This is the story of how Russia, according to several key security analyses, is using the actual process of peace talks as a weapon.
So how does that even happen? It's the central question we're digging into today. How can an event that's supposed to end a conflict become a tool to actually drag it out, but on terms that are much more favorable to one side? To get it, we have to look at a strategy that's been playing out for months.
And to really see this in action, we need to do something a little different. We're going to start near the end of the story, in a hypothetical near future, where all this diplomatic maneuvering comes to a head. So imagine this. It's January 2026 in Abu Dhabi. These massive peace talks are happening, supposedly to finalize a deal. On the surface, it all looks great, like real progress is being made. But behind the curtain, reports from places like The Guardian say America's allies in Europe are just watching with this growing sense of dread.
And this is where you see the trap. Russian diplomats keep saying over and over that the plan is 90% ready. And you know what? They're not technically wrong. They've agreed on all sorts of secondary stuff, humanitarian corridors, economic zones, you name it. But that last 10%, that's where they've hidden everything that actually matters. Sovereignty, borders, Crimea. It's a tactic, as analysts point out, designed to make Ukraine look like the bad guy, the only one standing in the way of peace.
So how did we even get to this potential disaster in Abu Dhabi? Well, the seeds for this whole mess were planted months before. To understand the trap, you have to go back to where it all started.
This timeline here really lays it out. It all kicks off with a summit in Anchorage, Alaska, back in August of 2025. This meeting is what analysts are calling Ground Zero. It was the moment that gave Russia the opening it needed to launch this whole diplomatic attack, which eventually leads to that pressure cooker situation in Abu Dhabi. And this slide, this just shows the huge disconnect perfectly. What the world saw was all public relations, right? Handshakes, impressive F-22s flying overhead, a whole spectacle designed to look good. But the actual substance, it was totally hollow. And crucially, no official joint statement was ever signed. That ambiguity is exactly what Russia exploited to create what analysts now call phantom obligations, commitments that never really existed. And all this happened with an empty chair where Ukraine should have been.
So this total lack of an official paper trail gives birth to this concept that Russian diplomats now use as a weapon, the Anchorage formula. It's not a real treaty, not at all. It's just a bunch of verbal hints and vague understandings from that meeting. But Russia talks about it like it's a binding promise made by the White House. It's become the absolute cornerstone of their entire pressure campaign.
So Russia has this vague, unwritten formula. How exactly do they turn it into such a powerful diplomatic weapon? Well, analysts have pretty much deconstructed the whole strategy into a clear three-step playbook. Step 1, legitimize. Just by showing up to a summit on American soil, Putin instantly broke the diplomatic isolation he'd been in. That alone, according to analysis from Chatham House, was a huge win. Step 2, redefine. Suddenly, Russia's demands aren't new ultimatums. Nope, they're just points that the U.S. supposedly already agreed to in principle back in Alaska. And step 3, escalate. With talks officially happening, Russia now has the perfect diplomatic cover to ramp up its attacks, all while blaming Ukraine for being unwilling to negotiate. And to pull this off, Russia used a classic good cop, bad cop routine, which one outlet dubbed flattery and fear. So you'd have Putin on one hand, publicly praising the U.S. president, playing to his ego as a peacemaker, and then, at the exact same time, his foreign ministry would be issuing these terrifying threats of escalation. It created this constant diplomatic whiplash in Washington, all designed to push for more concessions.
And honestly, this quote from Putin just captures the entire strategy perfectly. We remember what we talked about in Alaska. It's so clever because it's vague, right? But it's also incredibly menacing. It doesn't say what they talked about, but it implies the secret, shared understanding. It creates one of those phantom obligations, and it forces the White House to play defense, to either confirm or deny Russia's version of a conversation that was never written down.
Okay, so we've seen the strategy, the whole diplomatic game. But what about the actual substance of this peace plan they're pushing? When you start looking at the fine print, analysts at think tanks like the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, have found some really alarming stuff. Let's just start with one number, 600,000. That's the proposed limit, the cap, on the size of Ukraine's army. Now, on the surface, that might sound like a reasonable step toward demilitarization, but the implications, they are huge.
Analysts at CSIS are calling this specific clause a recipe for the next war. So why? Because it has nothing to do with what Ukraine actually needs to be secure. They argue it's just Russia trying to achieve through a treaty what it couldn't win on the battlefield, basically the strategic disarmament of its neighbor. It would leave Ukraine incredibly vulnerable and create this giant security vacuum right on NATO's doorstep.
And believe me, the dangers don't stop at the army size. The plan suggests a peace council to manage reconstruction, but it gives Russia veto power over the money. That's essentially giving them control of Ukraine's economic future. It also slaps a 20-year ban on Ukraine joining NATO without offering any other real security guarantees. And get this, it proposes a joint monitoring center at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which would basically legitimize Russia's military occupation of the site.
One writer in The Guardian really just hit the nail on the head. This isn't just about Ukraine. The way this deal is structured, many in Europe see it as an attempt to bypass them completely and just reshape the continent's entire security framework through a deal between the US and Russia. It's giving people flashbacks to a Munich 2.0 scenario.
So all of this leads us to the final and really the most important question. If the plan is this bad, what is Russia's real goal here? Are we talking about genuine peace, a temporary pause for them to rearm, or is this all just preparation for the next stage of the war?
The Atlantic Council offers a really sobering perspective on this. They argued that this conflict was never just about land. For the Kremlin, the very idea of a successful, sovereign, pro-Western Ukraine right on its border is seen as a fundamental existential threat to the stability of its own regime.
And if you follow that logic, you end up with this incredibly stark conclusion. According to this analysis, any deal, any peace deal at all, that allows Ukraine to survive and maybe even thrive as a functional, independent country is considered a strategic defeat for Moscow. That reframes these negotiations completely. It suggests they aren't about finding a compromise, but about ensuring a strategic victory.
Which leaves us with this final, really unsettling question. The whole point of diplomacy is supposed to be a lasting peace. But if the very terms of the deal seem designed, as these analyses suggest, to guarantee the next war, then can we even call it peace at all? That's the question that's just hanging over this entire diplomatic game.